Nobody nobody asked me if I had the recorder on. We almost missed it today. All right. Today I thought we'd do now, Jake, but I thought we'd talk about Samson today. I think most everybody knows the end of the story, but most of us don't always get the facts that lead up to things. You know, I've said several times that there is a line for each of our lives that when we cross it, we've crossed over and we can't go back on. In Judges chapter 13, Judges chapter 13, beginning with verse 1, the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines 40 years. Most of the time, the judges, it's only a matter of 10 or 20 years. But this generation of the Israelites had fallen to the level where God had pretty much had it with them, and he was just letting the Philistines have their way with Israel. Finally, it was time for God to step in, and the Bible says that in verse 2, there was a family of the Danites, and there was a man named Manoah, and his wife was barren and bare not. I wonder how many times when a woman can't have a baby, as frustrating as it is, how many times is it God's will? Virtually every time, we know that. But there's usually somebody special on the way in the Bible when a woman can't have a baby. I think of Sarah, she couldn't have a baby, and finally God gave her Isaac. I think of Rebecca, who couldn't have a baby, or no, it wasn't Rebecca, was it? She had Jacob and Esau. And then Rachel didn't have a baby, and finally Joseph came along. And we can go through the Bible. Samuel's mother couldn't have a baby, and then Samuel came along. And when those babies come along, they are somebody special. In the case of Samson, he was the exact opposite. Samson was the biggest disappointment any mother and father could have had. Even though he is the promised judge of Israel, the Philistines have ruled for 40 years, and finally God decides it's time to send a judge. And he comes down to Manoah and his wife, and he says, "You're going to have a baby." Verse 3, the angel of the Lord appeared unto the woman, and said unto her, Behold now, thou art barren, and bearest not, but thou shalt conceive, and bear a son. Oh, I've heard you, and I'm going to give you a baby. Now therefore beware, I pray thee, and drink not wine, nor strong drink, and eat not any unclean thing. For though thou shalt conceive, and bear a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite unto God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. I want you to notice several things there. The last one first, and that is God said he would only begin to deliver them out of the hands of the Philistines. It would really remain to David to remove the Philistines completely away. The entire ministry of Samuel, they would be there causing problems. The ministry and kingdom of Saul, they would be there and causing problems. And it was not until David subjugated them and brought them under that the Philistines finally were under control. The Bible also says that he would be a Nazarite. Natsar is a Hebrew word that means to be separate. A Nazarite was a person who took a special vow before God to be separated to God. Most people took that vow only for a short time. In Numbers chapter 6, we read this. Numbers 6 and verse 1, the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, And say unto them, when either man or woman shall separate themselves to vow a vow of a Nazarite, to separate themselves unto the Lord, he shall separate himself from wine and strong drink, and shall drink no vinegar of wine, or vinegar of strong drink, neither shall he drink any liquor of grapes, nor moist grapes, or dried. All the days of his separation shall he eat nothing that is made of the vine tree, from the kernels to the husk. So the first rule of a Nazarite was they were not in any way, shape, or form ever to have their minds polluted with alcohol. I know all the stories and all the arguments. I want you to notice he says wine and strong drink. Whenever wine and strong drink are mentioned together, they are condemned. There's one place in Deuteronomy where God says, I want you to come where the temple is. And I don't want any excuses. You come. And you bring your tithe and you come. And if you have to buy booze to be there, then you buy booze to be there, but you come. And he doesn't give permission to drink. He is not giving excuses not to come. But every place that wine is from the harvest, still fresh, it's the gift of God, and it's a thing of joy. But the minute it becomes intoxicating beverage, God condemns it. And we can argue about that another day when you've looked up all 219 times it appears in the Bible and know what it says, then we'll discuss it. But for right now, trust me, when wine and strong drink are together, God condemns it. But God says to the Nazarite, now we're not going to have any excuses on this deal. As long as you have the vow of the Nazarite, you are not going to eat grape seeds, and you are not going to chew the leaves. You are not going to eat the bark. You're not going to lick the roots. You are not going to touch anything that has to do with the grape, so that there is no chance that you are not in a right mind. Then he says, all the days of his separation shall eat nothing. All the days of the vow of his separation there shall no razor come upon his head. Now, if a man was going to be letting his hair grow for the vow of the Nazarite, that meant that the average Israelite cut his hair. I know all the arguments. I was a hippie once too, and I made all the same arguments. The Jews had long hair back then, etc. Two things I'd say. One is a man and a woman could be told apart by the length of their hair. However long was, it was the opposite of short. And however long short was, it was the opposite of long. God hates transvestitism. And he doesn't want men looking like women and women looking like men, whether there's an LBGQTXYZ or not. God said, I want men and women to be distinct in how they dress and appear. Therefore, for a man to have long hair, it would be a reproach for him. And so God said, I want your minds clear, and I want you willing to bear reproach for my name's sake. I want you to look different. I want everybody who sees you to know that you've taken a vow of the Nazarite and you have separated yourself to me until your vow is over. Until the days be fulfilled in which he separates himself unto the Lord, he shall be holy and shall let the locks of his hair of his head grow. All the days that he separates himself unto the Lord, he shall come at no dead body. Third thing, you stay clean. I know that preachers for 2,000 years, maybe 4,000 years, read in the Old Testament that you're unclean if you do certain things. And they tell you, well, that's because it's a sin. Let me suggest to you that if you touch a dead body that you find, you are going to be full of germs. You are unclean. If you have leprosy, You have a very contagious, deadly disease. You are unclean. And most of the other things that God says are unclean are actually unclean. Now, there may be a spiritual application, and we might be able to get sin out of it, but God says to the Israelite, when you take the vow of the Nazarite, I don't want you touching dead things, getting germs, and getting sick. I want you to be healthy. I want your mind to be clear. I do not want you drinking intoxicating beverages or anything that even gets close to it. A coroner would not have taken the vow of a Nazarite, or if he did, he'd get somebody else to do his job, Bell. But they didn't have coroners back then. They just buried you. But God said, I want those three things. I want your mind clear. I want your body to show. I want it clearly recognizable that you've taken a vow for me, and I want you clean. I don't want you catching some germy disease. God said to Manoah's wife, now you're not going to eat or drink grapes either, because I want this baby to be a Nazarite from the time of conception. That was unusual. Anybody else know somebody else that was a Nazarite from conception? I'll drop the mic for a second. Anybody else in the Bible was a Nazarite from conception? There's one more. Nope, not Jesus. Not Eli.
What about Jacob and Rebecca?
Not them either. John the Baptist. John the Baptist. God wanted these men set apart from everybody else from birth. They had an important role to play. Well, verse 17, I'm going to kind of jump down through here. But in verse 17, Manoah says to the angel, what's your name? What is thy name, that when thy sayings come to pass, we may do thee honor? And the angel of the Lord said unto him, why askest thou thus after my name, seeing it is secret? That is the same Hebrew word, Jake, here's why you learn Hebrew, as in Isaiah chapter 9 and verse 7, and his name shall be called Wonderful. Same word. Wonderful means it makes you wonder. What's your name? It's secret. I wonder what it is. Wonderful, that concept of something so big that it's above anything we could be able to be understanding. So then they offered a sacrifice in verse 19. And verse 20 said, for it came to pass when the flame went up toward heaven from off the altar, that the angel of the Lord climbed up, ascended in the flame of the altar. And Manoah and his wife looked at it and fell on their faces to the ground. I would too. Man, what just happened to us? You know, you think about this. If you read the first chapter of 2 Peter, Peter talks about having seen Jesus transfigured on the Mount of Transfiguration. I understand Jake taught on that a couple days ago. Both Peter and John make the same statement. They said, we touched his body. We saw him. Peter said, I saw him. I was on Transfiguration. But we have a more sure word of prophecy, the written word of God. Why? Because the moment something ends, our mind says, did I just see that? Oh, somebody else will say, that was just a vid. You were smoking too much pot. You didn't really see that. You were too hungry, you hadn't eaten, were hallucinating or something. But God has given us his written word. Peter called it a more sure word of prophecy. Well, Samson was born and he grew up, Judges chapter 14. When he grew up, he saw a woman in Timnath. That was the local Philistine town of the daughters of the Philistines. And he come up and told his father and his mother and said, I've seen a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me to wife. Very respectful young man. His father and mother said to him, Is there never a woman among the daughters of thy brethren, or among all my people, that thou hast to go take an uncircumcised Philistine? Samson, what is wrong with you? I mean, every time you talk about a girl being pretty, she's got to be a Philistine. You don't like Jewish girls. What is wrong? And Samson said to his father, Go get her for me, for she pleases me well. And we know Samson was a big, strong man, and so his father just kind of went along to get along. Verse 5, Then Samson went down, and his father and his mother, to Timnath, and came to the vineyards of Timnath. Nazarene vow, number 1, don't touch grapes. Don't get close to them. Don't eat them. Don't eat raisins. Don't drink grape juice. Don't use wine vinegar. Don't use anything from the grape. So what does Samson do? Right down through the center of the vineyard. Samson will push the limits all the way to the absolute edge. Yeah, it's good fruit, but God said don't do it. And if God said don't do it, eat some apples. But God said to Samson, no grapes. And behold, a young lion roared against him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he rent, or he tore, as he would have rent a goat. He reached out, grabbed that lion probably by the mouth, and ripped it right in half. He had nothing in his hand, but he told not his father or his mother what he had done. And he went down and talked with the woman, and she pleased Samson well. And after a time he returned to take her, and he turned aside to the carcass of the lion. Here comes vow number 2. And behold, there was a swarm of bees and honey in the carcass of the lion. And he took thereof in his hands. He reaches into the dead lion carcass, goes into the beehive, he grabs the honey, and now he has touched a dead body. All the days of his vow, he is not to touch a dead body. But he doesn't care. You see, Samson wasn't even saved at the time. Just being a Jew did not make you a saved person, any more than belonging to a Christian church makes you truly born again. What is a personal decision cannot be made by somebody else for you. And Samson's just being a typical hormone-filled young man. We don't read all this story because we don't have time today. But the kind of marriage that Samson had with this woman is almost like a private prostitute. Every time he goes to see his, quote, wife, he goes and has to pay her father for the privilege. Well, that didn't work out so good. He asked a riddle, and she tormented him. He gave her the answer. He never could say no to a woman. And her family guesses the riddle, and he gets mad, and he stomps off, and her father sells her to somebody else as damaged goods, and life goes on. Chapter 16, verse 1. Then Samson went to Gaza, and saw there a harlot, and went in unto her. Now he's just going straight into prostitution. And it was told the Gazites, the people of Gaza, saying, Samson is come hither. And they compassed him in, they surrounded him, and laid wait for him all night in the gate of the city. And were quiet all night, saying, In the morning, when it's day, we shall kill him. Samson lay till midnight, and rose at midnight, and took the doors of the gate of the city. Now, I've seen the gates of Nineveh. They are huge. They're in the library of British Library. They're huge, thick, maybe 5-6 inches thick, and big and tall, hundreds and hundreds of pounds. Well, Samson grabs the gate, doors, picks him up, carries him out of the city, and sets him up on top of a hill and just stands there and laughs at the Philistines. You can imagine they're not happy. And it came to pass afterwards, verse 4, that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. Third Philistine woman he gets involved with. He doesn't learn his lesson. And the lords of the Philistines came up unto her and said unto her, entice him and see wherein his great strength lies, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and we will give thee every one of us 1,100 pieces of silver. There's 5 kings of the Philistines, and so we're talking 5,500 pieces of silver, and she is a Philistine. She sells him out at the bat of an eyelash. And Delilah said to Samson, tell me, big boy, what makes you so strong? And wherewith thou mightest be bound to afflict thee. She doesn't even lie to him. He's so stupid that he just looks right past it. And Samson said unto her, if they bind me with 7 green withs that were never dried, then shall I be weak and be as another man. Well, the lords of the Philistines brought up to him 7 green withs, which had not been dried. She bound him with them, and now they were lying in wait, abiding with her in the chamber, hiding in the closets and stuff like Monty Python. And she said unto him, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he wakes up and breaks the withs as though they were threads of tow. The wax, if you pour wax off of a candle, the little strings of wax is broken when it touches the fire. So his strength was not known. Delilah said unto him, you mocked me, told me lies. Boo-hoo! Now tell me, I pray thee, wherewith thou mightest be bound. And he said, if they bind me with new ropes that were never occupied, then shall I be weak and be as another man. He don't get it. He's as dumb as Gronkowski that plays for the Patriots. Nobody ever accused him of being smart. Well, Delilah therefore took new ropes and bound him therewith. You know, the guy never even figured out. Belle, that's a good question, because God sovereignly said ahead of time to his mom and dad, this is the guy I'm going to use to deliver Israel. God uses us one way or the other. He can either work through us if we cooperate, or he'll work in spite of us. But if God decides to use us, we're going to be used. She takes the new rope. She ties him up. The Philistines are hiding in the bedroom again. They're laying in the chamber, right in the bedroom, and he breaks them off as if they're nothing. Third time, Delilah said, you keep making fun of me. You told me lies. Tell me wherewith thou mightest be bound. And he said unto her, if you weave the 7 locks of my hair with the web. Now he's getting closer to the truth. She's wearing him down. Put my hair into a weaving loom, and I'll be weak. And she fastened it with the pin, said, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson. He awakes out of his sleep, went away with the pin of the beam, carries the whole loom without even thinking about it. She said unto, how can you tell me you love me, and you're just deceiving me? And she's selling him for 5,500 pieces of silver. And he doesn't get it. He just doesn't get it. Thou hast mocked me these 3 times, and hast not told me wherein thy great strength lies. And it came to pass, when she pressed him daily with her words, and urged him, so that his soul was vexed unto death. She was literally nagging him to death. Tell me where your power is. I'm not telling you where my power is. Come on, if you love me, you tell me. You keep your mouth shut. Leave me alone. I am not telling you where it can. Oh, if you love me, you went on and on and on and on and on and on and on. That finally, after a week of this, he told her all his heart, and he said unto her, there hath not come a razor upon my head, for I've been a Nazarite unto God from my mother's womb. But do you get it? He didn't even understand where his strength was coming from. It was not because of his long hair. It was because he was a Nazarite from his mother's womb. His hair was just the last of the 3 signs of the Nazarite. The thing that made him distinctly a Nazarite, the thing that said, I took a vow to God and I am separated to God. As long as I have this long hair, I am separated to God. But if I be shaven, then will my strength go from me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. But you know what? Samson didn't even believe it, because he'd already broken the other vows, and God hadn't taken his strength away. But Delilah could see, this time he told her the truth. When Delilah saw, verse 18, that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, Come up this once, for he has showed me all his heart. Then the lords of the Philistines came up unto her and brought money in their hands. And she made him sleep upon her knees and called for a man. Everybody says Delilah cut his hair. She didn't. Then the lords, and she caused him to shave off. She called for a man and caused him to shave off the 7 locks of his head. And she began to afflict him. And his strength went from him. She's poking him. She's playing with him. He thinks she's just flirting and being a wife. And he doesn't realize what's going on. And she said, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he woke out of his sleep and said, I'll go out as other times before and shake myself. Here's a terrible statement. And he wist not. Wist is the past tense of wit. Wit is the present tense of to know by eye experience. A witness is someone who has wit a crime taking place. It was a first-hand experience. He did not know that the Lord was departed from him. He had never cared to think about the Lord before. He didn't know the Lord was with him. He just knew he was strong. But the Philistines took him, and here's what sin does to you. Put out his eyes. It blinds you. After a while, you don't think there's anything wrong with it. I just read where a preacher who wrote a book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, just denied his faith, has practically admitted he's been involved in homosexual experiences, and resigned his church and is completely repudiated Christianity. It blinds you. These preachers, they get caught in sin. Why does it happen? They get away with it for so long, and then they get caught when it does the most damage. But they're blinded to the fact that they are doing wrong. Why, God would stop me, surely. No, God won't stop me from sinning. But he will let the devil pull the rug out from under me. Once sin blinds you, it binds you. All the devil's apples have worms in them. And all the worms have hooks in them. Do you ever think about how dumb fish are? I mean, I've fished with a piece of metal 4 inches long, and a stupid fish will bite it. He just thinks it's another fish. He thinks it'll taste good. And he bites into it. In there is a hook, and the next thing you know, he's in my boat. Sin binds you, and then it grinds you. The Philistines took him, he put out his eyes, brought him down to Gaza, brought him and bound him with fetters of brass, and he did grind in the prison house. They had him hooked up like an ox grinding the grain in the prison hall. And time goes by. Round and round in the darkness Samson walks. The lords of the Philistines, they laugh at him. They mock him. He's the great hero of Israel. Oh, where's your God now, Samson? The Philistines gathered them together to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon, their god, and to rejoice, for they said, our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hand. Howbeit the hair of his head began to grow again after he was shaven. There's no dead bodies to touch in the prison where he is. He's just grinding grain day and night. In fact, it's always night because he has no eyes. There's no temptation of a Philistine girl down the street. There's no temptation at all, chained to a grinding stone. He's bound, breast round and round and round. He's not drinking wine. He's not touching dead bodies. And his hair begins to grow. God's going to cause him to be a Nazirite, whether he wanted to be one or not. When the people saw him, verse 24, they praised their God. Ooh, that's a bad mistake. You never insult the God of heaven. They praised their God, for they said, our God has delivered him into our hands, our enemy, the destroyer of our country, which slew many of us. No, Dagon had not defeated Jehovah. God had given Samson over to the slavery of his own sin. And it came to pass when they were good and drunk, when their hearts were merry, that they said, call for Samson. We need a little entertainment here, that he may make us sport. And they called for Samson out of the prison house, and he made them sport. They mocked him, they had fun, and finally when they got tired of him, they set him between two pillars. Now, a Philistine house was 2 floors high, especially if you were rich. And you would build the living quarters downstairs, but you would build a rooftop kind of place to relax and enjoy yourself. It almost became the prototype of the Colosseum, with seats around the outside and a hole that you could look down and see the wild animals or the person you were torturing. And down there is old Samson, and they're up top, and they're getting drunker by the minute. Getting drunk is always so good for you. And Samson said to the lad that held him by the hand, suffer me, or allow me, that I may fill the pillars, whereupon the house stands, that I may lean upon them. Oh, I'm tired. Would you put me over by the pillar? Now the house was full of men and women, and all the lords of the Philistines were there, and they were upon the roof, about 3,000 men and women, that beheld while Samson made sport. And finally, for the first time in Samson's life, he prays. He's never had a spiritual moment before this one. He'll never have another one. Yet he is written in Hebrews chapter 11 in the hall of faith. And Samson called upon the Lord and said, O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me, I pray thee, only this once, O God, that I may be at once avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars upon which the house stood, and on which it was borne, and one on the right hand and the other with his left. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. Sounds like suicide. And he bowed himself with all his might, and the house fell upon the lords, upon all the people that were therein, so that the dead which he slew at his death were more than they which he slew in his life. Then his brethren and all the house of his father came down, took him, brought him up, buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol, and the burying place of Manoah his father, and he judged Israel 20 years. Samson crossed a line. The line for Samson was his hair. God tolerated as Samson danced up to the line and then stood back several times in his life. God was the one who had determined Samson would deliver Israel. But Samson just never took it seriously. When he killed the Philistine, it was almost like a sport. It was never to deliver Israel. It was because they insulted him, they tricked him, they did something, made him mad. Only this last time, as he heard them making fun of their God, did Samson decide that Israel's God would be his God. And because he finally got right, God gave him the strength for one great feat to bring down the Philistines. But the whole story is the story of the Nazarite. Samson kept pushing the lines. Through the vineyard, grapes don't matter. Touch the dead lion's body, that rule doesn't matter. Cut my hair, go ahead, what's the difference? Only to find out he had taken one step too many. We were talking the other day about fearing God. We should fear God enough to know that God will keep his word, and that includes punishment if we step across the line. Sometimes we know the line, sometimes we don't. But if and when we step across that line, we're done. And then sin takes us, it blinds us, it binds us, and it grinds us. Father, help us now as we allow another Bible story to get a hold of us and touch us at the very heart of our being. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.